What happens when a billionaire's son gets trapped in an industrial restaurant freezer, his life hanging by a thread, and the only person who notices is a black waitress everyone has overlooked? As temperatures plummet and hope fades with each labored breath, she faces an impossible choice. Risk her minimum wage job by damaging expensive kitchen equipment, or let the freezer door become a cold steel coffin for the heir to an empire that could crush her with a single phone call. Jasmine Tucker wiped sweat from her brow as she balanced 6 plates along her arms, a skill perfected over 8 years of waitressing at La Maison Dorée, where the chandeliers cost more than her annual salary. The kitchen sizzled with activity as Chef Antoine barked orders in his thick French accent, while line cooks scrambled between steaming pots and flaming grills, their white uniforms stained with evidence of the dinner rush. Jasmine had 20 minutes until her shift ended, 20 precious minutes before she needed to catch the last bus across town to relieve her elderly neighbor who watched 6-year-old Zoe on late nights, but something felt off in the carefully choreographed chaos of the restaurant floor. Marcus Stone, the 22-year-old son of tech billionaire William Stone and reluctant heir to the Stone Enterprises empire, had been shadowing management all week with his signature bored expression and designer clothes that cost more than her monthly rent. Yet now he was nowhere to be seen despite his half-finished drink still sweating on the bar. Mr. Peterson, the restaurant manager with thinning hair and thickening waistline who never missed an opportunity to remind Jasmine how replaceable she was, smiled too widely when she asked about Marcus. His voice carried an artificial casualness as he straightened his already perfect tie and said, "Marcus left early, probably found somewhere more interesting to spend his evening than learning about restaurant operations." But Jasmine noticed the keys to the vintage Bugatti still hanging in the office, and the designer jacket draped over a chair, details others might miss, but her survival had always depended on observing what privileged people overlooked. Between trips to tables 4 and 7, she passed the massive stainless steel walk-in freezer and heard something that stopped her heart mid-beat, a faint rhythmic thumping like someone pounding weakly from inside, barely audible above the kitchen symphony of clattering pots and shouted orders. Jasmine pressed her ear against the cold metal door, the chill seeping through her thin black uniform as goosebumps rose along her arms, and heard it again, clearer now, the unmistakable sound of someone trapped inside growing weaker with each desperate attempt to be heard. "Something is wrong," she whispered to herself, her breath visible in the suddenly cold air around the freezer door, a chill that had nothing to do with temperature, but everything to do with the sickening realization dawning in her mind as she noticed the industrial handle slightly bent and the digital thermometer display showing negative 20 degrees. Instead of the standard -4. She glanced back at Peterson, who watched her from across the kitchen with narrowed eyes and a tight smile that never reached his cold gaze. And in that moment Jasmine understood with perfect clarity that sometimes the monsters wore designer suits and sometimes being a good person meant risking everything, even the job she desperately needed to keep her daughter fed and housed. Because some choices defined who you were at your core, and she had always chosen humanity over self-preservation, even when it cost her everything. Friends, before we go further, may I ask a small favor? Please subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us keep bringing you these stories, and reaching 1,000 subscribers soon is so important for us to continue. We also love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how our little storytelling circle is spreading across the world. Jasmine gripped the freezer handle with both hands, the metal biting into her palms as she pulled with all her 5'4" frame could muster, muscles straining against the resistance that felt deliberate rather than mechanical, the handle giving just enough to crack open the heavy door before snapping back with unnatural force. The blast of Arctic air that escaped through the momentary gap sent shivers down her spine as she glimpsed what waited inside, renewing her determination as she braced one foot against the wall and yanked again with desperate strength, this time managing to create a space wide enough to slip her slender body through into the glacial chamber beyond. The freezer interior loomed like a macabre meat locker from a horror film. Frost crystallized across every surface while massive sides of beef and lamb hung from ceiling hooks like pale, silent witnesses, their frozen forms casting long shadows across the floor where Marcus Stone lay curled in a fetal position against the far wall. His designer clothes offered little protection against the killing cold. His lips tinged an alarming shade of blue that matched his fingertips, violent shivers racking his body as he struggled to maintain consciousness in the sub-zero temperature that had already begun crystallizing his tears against his cheeks. "Help me, please," he managed through violently chattering teeth, each syllable a battle against muscles seizing from hypothermia, his voice barely audible and stripped of the arrogance that typically colored his interactions with staff like her, reduced now to simply another human being facing mortality. Jasmine rushed to his side, her waitress uniform providing minimal protection against the freezing air that burned her lungs with each breath, quickly shrugging off her small cardigan to wrap around his shoulders, while rubbing his arms vigorously to stimulate circulation. "How long have you been in here?" she asked, noting with growing alarm the early signs of frostbite on his ears and the dangerous slowness of his responses as she helped him to unsteady feet, his usual grace abandoned as he leaned heavily against her much smaller frame. "Almost an hour, I think," he slurred. "Peterson said he needed special aged meat and asked me to check something, then the door just closed." Jasmine felt ice forming in her very veins that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the implication of those words. The realization that this was no accident, striking her with sickening clarity as she guided Marcus toward the exit, only to find the door refused to open from the inside, the emergency release button frozen solid and unresponsive despite her increasingly frantic attempts. Outside in the busy kitchen, staff moved about their tasks completely unaware of the life and death drama unfolding behind the freezer door. Separated by mere inches of insulated steel yet worlds apart, while inside Marcus began slipping toward unconsciousness against Jasmine's shoulder, his heartbeat slowing dangerously with each passing minute in the killing cold, his life literally depending on the actions of a woman he had barely acknowledged before today, a single mother who lived paycheck to precarious paycheck in a neighborhood he would never visit, their disparate worlds colliding in a moment that would irrevocably change both their lives forever. Jasmine burst through the kitchen swinging doors, her voice cutting through the clatter of pots and sizzle of grills as she shouted above the chaos that Marcus Stone was trapped in the freezer and needed immediate help, her words causing a ripple of shock that momentarily halted the dinner service before Mr. Peterson materialized at her side with surprising speed, his manicured hand clamping around her upper arm with bruising force as he steered her away from curious ears. His voice remained deceptively calm as he straightened his gold cufflinks, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator as he informed her that maintenance was already called and would arrive in approximately 45 minutes, so she should return to her tables and forget about matters beyond her pay grade. "The industrial freezer door is jammed from inside," she insisted, struggling to keep desperation from her voice as she described Marcus, turning bluer by the minute, his consciousness fading in the sub-zero temperature where human flesh would freeze solid within 2 hours. Peterson adjusted his perfectly knotted tie and glanced toward the dining room where crystal glasses caught the light from imported chandeliers, his priorities evident in his dismissive tone as he explained the custom freezer door cost more than she made in 6 months, and any damage to it would be deducted from her already meager wages. "Return to your section immediately, or consider yourself terminated," he added with finality, his threat hanging in the air between them, as tangible as the steam rising from the kitchen grills. Jasmine felt the weight of her reality pressing down like a physical force as mental calculations raced through her mind, the precarious balance of her existence suddenly teetering on an impossible choice as she thought of little Zoe waiting at home with her inhaler that needed refilling, the past-due rent notice taped to their apartment door, the electricity bill marked final warning, and the school field trip money due tomorrow that she had promised her daughter after skipping the last 3 outings. Her job at La Maison Dorée was the only thing standing between them and homelessness. The tips from wealthy patrons barely covering Zoe's medical treatments for severe asthma. That insurance deemed partially elective, despite her daughter's blue lips during attacks that mirrored Marcus' current condition with haunting similarity. The parallel struck Jasmine with the force of revelation. Memories flashing of endless emergency room visits where doctors made her wait while children with better insurance were treated first. The same casual disregard for suffering that Peterson displayed now. The same calculation of human worth based on financial metrics rather than inherent value. She glanced through the circular window to the dining room, where patrons in designer clothes sipped $100 wines beside table settings of silver and imported china, blissfully unaware of the life literally freezing away mere feet from their gourmet meals. Then back to the freezer door with its digital display, now reading -22 degrees and dropping. 6 months of wages versus a human life. Temporary security versus moral certainty. Survival versus sacrifice. The impossible equation balancing in her mind as Peterson watched her internal struggle with the satisfied smile of someone accustomed to others bending to his will, someone who had never faced the razor edge of true consequence or felt the burden of genuine moral courage. In that crystalline moment of decision, Jasmine saw with perfect clarity that some costs were paid in currency more valuable than money. Some choices defined not just your circumstances but your very soul, and she knew exactly what she must do despite the price she would inevitably pay. Jasmine pivoted away from Peterson without another word. Her decision crystallized into absolute certainty as she strode through the kitchen with purpose that parted the sea of white uniforms before her. Ignoring the manager shouting threats at her back while she approached the industrial freezer with the calm focus of someone who recognized their defining moment when it arrived. The kitchen fell to sudden silence as staff sensed the electric charge of consequence hanging in the air. Spoons suspended midster and knives paused above partially chopped vegetables as Jasmine kicked off her practical black work shoes and planted her stockinged feet firmly on the tile floor. Years of raising a child alone, having taught her that sometimes impossible situations required impossible strength. She studied the freezer door with tactical precision, identifying the weakest point where the locking mechanism connected to the frame, then took 3 measured steps backward, while kitchen staff watched in stunned silence, their collective breath held as they witnessed a 5'4" woman prepare to challenge both physics and authority in a single defiant act. Jasmine launched forward with unexpected athleticism, channeling every frustration from every time she had been overlooked or underestimated into raw kinetic force as her right foot connected with the freezer door precisely at its vulnerability point, the impact sending shockwaves of pain through her bones, while the sound of straining metal reverberated through the suddenly silent kitchen like a starting gun at a race. Everyone had been unconsciously waiting to begin. The door held for one stubborn moment before surrendering to her determination, with a shriek of protesting metal as the frame bent outward and the locking mechanism tore free from its housing, the barrier between life and death collapsing under the power of moral certainty, applied with perfect precision. Frigid air billowed out in a ghostly cloud as Jasmine ignored the throbbing pain radiating from her foot, immediately entering the freezer to find Marcus crumpled on the floor with his skin gone grey and movements reduced to sporadic trembling, his consciousness hanging by threads thin as spider silk, while frost crusted his eyelashes and brows like a macabre coronation. She hauled him upright with strength that belied her slight frame, draping his arm across her shoulders and supporting his weight as she guided him out into the relative warmth of the kitchen where stunned staff stood, frozen in their own tableau of disbelief at the waitress who had just destroyed. Equipment worth thousands without hesitation. Peterson advanced with fury, contorting his features into an ugly mask of thwarted authority and wounded pride, spitting threats about police and destruction of property and criminal charges that would ensure she never worked in this city again while Marcus slumped against her, his billionaire blood warming degree by degree as circulation gradually returned to his extremities. Jasmine met Peterson's rage with serene certainty that transcended fear, her voice quiet yet somehow filling the entire kitchen as she stated simply, "Sometimes people matter more than things." Words that hung in the air like a judgment as she helped Marcus to a chair where shocked line cooks immediately wrapped him in tablecloths and jacket offerings, the improvised kindness breaking the spell of inaction that had gripped the room. The head chef barked orders for ambulances and hot tea, while servers who had never acknowledged Jasmine beyond necessary work interactions now looked at her with something approaching reverence, witnessing the birth of consequences both terrible and wonderful that would ripple outward from this singular moment of moral courage when one underpaid waitress chose humanity over self-preservation, setting in motion events that would ultimately transform not just two lives, but an entire power structure built on the illusion that wealth determined worth. Paramedics swarmed the kitchen like efficient angels in Navy uniforms, their practiced hands wrapping Marcus in thermal blankets while rattling off medical terminology that transformed the restaurant air from privileged person to patient in distress, his core temperature dangerously low but salvageable, thanks to intervention that came just before irreversible damage could take hold. Jasmine stood aside, suddenly invisible again now that authorities had arrived, watching silently as Marcus caught her gaze from the stretcher and mouthed, "Thank you," before the swinging doors closed behind the medical procession, leaving her alone in the aftermath of her choice as Peterson returned with security guards flanking him like sentinels of consequences. "We have zero tolerance for destruction of property," he announced loudly enough for all staff to hear, making an example of her as he thrust termination papers into her trembling hands, along with her final paycheck minus deductions for the freezer door, the amount so small it almost seemed like a cruel joke after 8 years of service, a paper testament to how little her contribution had ever been valued. The bus ride home felt surreal. City lights blurring through windows streaked with rain that matched the tears she refused to shed in public. Her foot throbbing with what was likely a hairline fracture, but medical attention, a luxury she could no longer afford, with unemployment looming like a gathering storm. Her apartment building greeted her with familiar disrepair, the elevator perpetually out of service, forcing her to climb 4 flights on her injured foot, each step a painful reminder of choices made and consequences accepted, yet something like peace settled around her shoulders as she unlocked the door to the small space she had transformed into a sanctuary through sheer force of will and love. The apartment might be tiny, with water stains mapping the ceiling like abstract art and furniture salvaged from second-hand stores, but warm light glowed from mismatched lamps and colourful drawings covered the refrigerator, alongside perfect attendance certificates and handmade birthday cards, physical evidence of priorities that money could never measure. Mrs. Guzman from next door dozed in the threadbare armchair, rousing as Jasmine entered to report that Zoe had finished her homework and gone to bed on time, her breathing clear tonight without needing the rescue inhaler. Small victories that suddenly seemed monumental in the recalibration of perspective that followed moral crossroads. Only after her elderly neighbor departed and the apartment fell silent did Jasmine finally allow the tears to come, sitting at her small kitchen table with bills spread before her like an impossible puzzle missing crucial pieces, calculations that no longer added up to survival, as sobs racked her body, with the delayed reaction to stress and pain and fear for their precarious future, now balanced on the knife edge of disaster. Yet beneath the tears flowed an underground river of certainty that refused to be diminished by practical concerns, an unshakable knowledge that even if she could return to that moment of decision, knowing every consequence that would follow, she would kick down that door again without hesitation, because some actions transcended the mathematics of survival to become definitions of self. Her gaze drifted to the small vision board hanging beside the kitchen calendar, where magazine cutouts represented dreams deferred but not abandoned, college brochures and nursing program pamphlets, surrounding a photo of Zoe with the words "Future Doctor" scrawled in childish handwriting, reminding Jasmine that she had always taught her daughter that character outweighed circumstance and actions revealed true values. Lessons that would ring hollow if not demonstrated when testing moments arrived. The tears gradually subsided, replaced by determination that settled into her bones with familiar weight as she reached for her phone to begin the process of rebuilding, starting with job applications that would run late into the night after her swollen foot was elevated and wrapped in frozen peas, practical problems requiring practical solutions, while the larger question of whether she had done right had already been answered with absolute certainty in her heart. Morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains Jasmine had sewn from discount fabric, casting dappled patterns across her small kitchen table, where job applications lay half-completed beside a calculator, displaying discouragingly small numbers and past-due notices arranged in order of urgency. Sleep had been elusive, her injured foot throbbing beneath the makeshift ice pack of frozen vegetables, while anxiety spun scenarios of homelessness through her exhausted mind. Yet she had risen at 5:30, as always, to prepare Zoe for school, masking her fears behind the practiced smile of a mother determined to shield her child from adult concerns. The first sign that something had changed came when her ancient flip phone began vibrating with unprecedented persistence, unknown numbers lighting up the screen with such frequency that she finally silenced it while preparing Zoe's favorite dinosaur-shaped pancakes, assuming the calls were from debt collectors emboldened by news of her unemployment that somehow had already spread through their efficient networks. It was Zoe who first noticed the gathering crowd outside their apartment building. Her small face pressed against the window as she called with confusion-tinged excitement about people with big cameras pointed at their home, words that sent Jasmine rushing to the glass despite her painful limp, parting the curtain just enough to reveal what could only be described as a media encampment forming on their normally quiet street. Television vans with satellite dishes sprouted like strange mechanical mushrooms alongside reporters in professional attire, clutching microphones and photographers with massive lenses all pointed toward her building, their collective energy vibrating with the particular frequency of a breaking human interest story, too compelling to ignore. Her stomach dropped as fragments of their shouted questions floated up to her fourth-floor window, catching phrases like billionaires, sun savior, and heroic waitress, and against all odds rescue that transformed her private moral choice into unexpected public spectacle. Jasmine backed away from the window, as though the attention itself might burn, her mind racing to understand this bewildering development, while simultaneously calculating how to get Zoe to school without subjecting her daughter to the intimidating gauntlet of cameras and questions, the practical problem momentarily overshadowing the larger implications of her newfound and unwanted visibility. Her phone vibrated again with incoming text messages from co-workers she barely knew, sharing links to news articles already published online. Her name and hastily assembled biography spreading through digital space at the terrifying speed of viral content, complete with unflattering employee ID photos somehow obtained from restaurant records and quotes from unnamed sources describing her as quiet but dedicated, generic descriptors that failed to capture any essence of her actual self, yet now defined her in the public imagination. Through the thin walls came Mrs. Guzman's television turned to unprecedented volume, the familiar voice of a morning show host breathlessly recounting how an ordinary waitress had saved Marcus Stone, only son of tech billionaire William Stone, from certain death after being trapped in a restaurant freezer. The basic facts correct but context missing, and nuance sacrificed for narrative simplicity that transformed complex reality into digestible inspiration. Jasmine sank onto her worn couch as the implications washed over her in waves, understanding with growing alarm that her private act of moral courage had somehow metamorphosed into public property without her consent or control. a story being shaped by others for consumption while she remained voiceless at its center, her 15 minutes of fame arriving uninvited, at the precise moment when anonymity was her greatest protection against Peterson and his powerful connections who could easily transform her into the villain of his counter-narrative with strategic quotes and carefully worded statements about property destruction and protocol violations. The persistent ringing of her phone suddenly took on more ominous meaning as she realized that visibility brought vulnerability, her precarious situation now complicated by spotlights she never sought and attention she could neither control nor afford, creating an entirely new category of problems for which her life of quiet struggle had provided no preparation. The media siege continued relentlessly throughout the day, forcing Jasmine to request a neighbor collect Zoe from school to avoid subjecting her daughter to the frightening gauntlet of cameras and shouted questions. While inside their small apartment, Jasmine ignored the persistent knocking and declined calls from numbers she didn't recognize, including several from La Maison Dorée that likely represented Peterson's attempts to control the narrative now spinning beyond his influence. Rain began falling as evening approached, droplets racing down the cracked window glass like tears, while Jasmine helped Zoe with multiplication tables by lamplight, the electricity preserved through careful conservation despite the temptation to distract themselves with television, their normal routine maintained through sheer maternal determination to create islands of normalcy amid chaos. The sound of commotion from the street below drew her reluctantly to the window once more, in time to witness the arrival of a vehicle so incongruous in their neighborhood it might as well have been a spaceship landing, a sleek black Maybach with diplomatic tint windows that parted the sea of rain-soaked reporters like an obsidian blade, its pristine surface reflecting distorted versions of the neon signs from the convenience store and pawn shop that bookended their apartment building. Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs with premonition as the rear door opened and a figure emerged beneath a large black umbrella held by a discreet security presence, his expensive overcoat and confident posture immediately identifying him as someone accustomed to power, even before the flashing cameras confirmed his identity. William Stone himself stepping onto the cracked sidewalk outside her building with the casual confidence of someone who had never been denied entry anywhere. His arrival sent the media into frenzied overdrive. Questions shouted into the rainy evening like desperate prayers, while he moved with remarkable efficiency through the lobby and presumably toward their apartment, his presence creating fresh anxiety, as Jasmine hastily straightened their modest living room and sent Zoe to change into her good school shirt. Practical preparations for a meeting that felt somehow inevitable, yet impossible. The knock when it came was surprisingly gentle, 3 measured taps that nonetheless carried the weight of worlds colliding as Jasmine opened the door to find herself face to face with the 48th richest man in America, his 6-foot frame filling her doorway while subtle security personnel established perimeter positions in the hallway with professional discretion. William Stone stood before her, not with the expected arrogance of extreme wealth, but with an expression she struggled to categorize, something complex etched into the lines around eyes that had witnessed the machinery of power from its innermost chambers, his gaze assessing her with unexpected intensity before he spoke, in a voice calibrated to put others at ease despite its underlying authority. "My son told me what you did, how you saved his life, when others calculated the cost of action too high a price," he said with surprising directness. No preamble or social niceties to buffer the collision of their disparate realities as he reached into his impeccably tailored jacket to extract a check which he extended toward her with the casual confidence of someone whose financial gestures typically ended conversations rather than beginning them. Jasmine hesitated before accepting the folded paper, momentarily distracted by the surreal contrast between his hand, with its subtle evidence of expert grooming, and her own bearing the small burns and calluses of service work, before unfolding the check to reveal a sum that momentarily blurred her vision with its parade of zeros, an amount that could transform their precarious existence in an instant yet somehow felt incomplete in ways she couldn't immediately articulate. My son's life is worth more than this. But it's a start. William Stone continued, something flickering behind his carefully composed expression that hinted at deeper currents beneath the expected narrative of wealthy gratitude, his gaze moving past her to take in the modest apartment with its mismatched furniture and carefully maintained dignity, lingering with particular interest on the wall of school awards and artwork that chronicled Zoe's childhood, before returning to Jasmine with an intensity that suggested he was truly seeing her rather than looking through her as wealthy patrons typically did. There was something in his careful assessment that transcended simple appreciation or obligation, something almost like recognition flickering at the edges of their interaction, creating the unsettling impression that this encounter represented not conclusion but beginning. His presence in her apartment, less about settling debts than establishing connection for reasons not yet revealed, but substantial enough to bring the 48th richest man in America to her door personally, rather than dispatching intermediaries as would be expected. The fragile peace that followed William Stone's visit lasted precisely 13 hours before Jasmine's phone exploded with texts from former co-workers sharing links to breaking news stories featuring Mr. Peterson standing before La Maison Dorée's gleaming facade, his expression calibrated to convey professional concern as he spoke into a forest of microphones about the regrettable incident that had been dangerously mischaracterized by an ambitious employee with history of disciplinary issues. Jasmine watched with growing horror as Peterson skillfully wove truth and fabrication into a compelling alternative narrative where Marcus had never been in genuine danger, but merely briefly inconvenienced in a properly functioning freezer. With emergency release buttons that any responsible person would have utilized, rather than resorting to property destruction, his words painting her not as savior, but as opportunist, who recognized the Stone name as ticket to attention and potential lawsuit leverage. The restaurant will be pursuing legal action for substantial damages to our property and reputation, Peterson concluded with practiced regret tinging his voice while adjusting his perfectly knotted tie, adding the particularly venomous observation that Jasmine Tucker had always been trouble in the workplace, prone to exaggeration and rule violations that management had tolerated out of compassion for her single mother status until this final unacceptable breach. Each word struck Jasmine with physical force as she sat on her worn couch clutching her phone, watching her public narrative transform from heroic waitress to calculating opportunist in the time it took Peterson to complete a single press conference, understanding with sickening clarity the power imbalance that allowed his version to immediately gain traction across news outlets, eager for controversy to extend the story's life cycle. Former co-workers called with whispered updates from inside the restaurant, reporting that security footage from the freezer area had mysteriously disappeared during routine system maintenance while Peterson had called mandatory staff meetings to discuss proper messaging should reporters contact them, his thinly veiled threats about future employment references, ensuring collective amnesia regarding the actual freezer temperature and Marcus' dire condition. Social media erupted with competing hashtags as complete strangers debated her character and motivations based on fragments of information and personal biases, her identity reduced to symbolic battleground for arguments about personal responsibility and corporate accountability, while she remained voiceless at the center of a storm growing beyond her control. The check from William Stone remained uncashed on her kitchen table, simultaneously solution and complication, as accepting it could now appear to validate Peterson's claims about financial motivation, yet pride seemed unaffordable luxury when facing rent due in 8 days, and medication Zoe needed, regardless of public opinion concerning her mother. What felt most devastating beyond practical concerns was the swift erosion of the momentary community support that had briefly surrounded her, neighbors who had proudly claimed connection, now maintaining careful distance as though moral complexity might prove contagious. Her isolation growing in direct proportion to her public exposure as people avoided association with controversial figures whose narratives remained unresolved. A particularly brutal moment came when Zoe returned from school with reddened eyes and tight expression that broke Jasmine's heart. Reporting classmates had shown her news clips on phones during lunch, where a man in a tie said her mother was a liar who broke things for attention, cruel words that penetrated deeper than any Peterson could launch directly at her. The protection of her daughter from judgment for her choices suddenly impossible as their private struggle became public spectacle. With bitter clarity, Jasmine recognized Peterson's strategic brilliance in launching his counterattack precisely when public interest began fading, reigniting media attention with controversy that positioned him as reasonable authority against her implied instability, creating doubt sufficient to tarnish her credibility in ways that extended beyond this incident to potentially impact future employment opportunities. His power to shape narrative, extending far beyond their brief employment relationship, into a systematic dismantling of her character designed to neutralize any threat she might represent to his position or reputation. Each news alert notification became harbinger of fresh attack. As Peterson expanded his campaign with surgical precision, his resources and connections allowing sustained offensive against which she had no equivalent defensive capability, transforming what should have been straightforward moral victory into complex battle for credibility. She lacked resources to fight, while simultaneously navigating practical survival concerns that waited for no resolution of public opinion. The unexpected breathing room provided by William Stone's uncashed check allowed Jasmine one luxury she hadn't afforded herself since the freezer incident: an evening without immediate job applications to instead investigate the nagging sense of familiarity that had flickered across the billionaire's face during their brief interaction, something in his careful assessment of her suggesting recognition beyond their current circumstances. Zoe sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by construction paper, creating an all-about-me poster for school. Carefully gluing photos, including several featuring Grandma Esther, whose absence still created palpable hollow spaces in their lives 3 years after cancer claimed her, while Jasmine opened her laptop with its cracked case held together by colorful tape her daughter had applied as decoration rather than repair. The search began with simple curiosity, typing William Stone Riverpoint Properties into the search bar based on faded memories of the development company logos that had appeared like harbingers of change throughout her grandmother's neighborhood a decade earlier, community landmarks vanishing beneath construction equipment, while residents received eviction notices with corporate letterhead offering modest relocation stipends inadequate for equivalent housing elsewhere. The results populated her screen with archived newspaper articles and business announcements from 10 years prior, documenting the transformation of the historically Black Oak Park neighborhood into the now trendy Riverview district, familiar story of gentrification repeated in cities nationwide. Yet, this particular instance carrying personal significance, as Jasmine scrolled through images of community meetings where elderly residents protested displacement from homes they had occupied for generations. Her breath caught when she discovered a particular photo buried in a local newspaper archive showing her grandmother Esther Tucker standing resolute before a podium addressing city council members about the human cost of development without community involvement, her dignity intact despite the losing battle she fought against market forces and political connections that prioritized property values over neighborhood continuity. The article mentioned Stone Enterprises as majority stakeholder in Riverpoint Properties, connecting William Stone directly to the development that had displaced her grandmother from the modest home where Jasmine herself had spent childhood afternoons learning to make sweet potato pie and cornbread from scratch. Recipes now preserved only in memory and index cards, with Esther's distinctive handwriting, their connection to place severed by decisions made in boardrooms they would never enter. With increasing urgency, Jasmine continued searching, discovering Stone Enterprises had purchased the entire block, including her grandmother's house and adjacent community garden where neighbors had grown vegetables and children had played for decades, transforming the area into luxury condominiums now marketed to young professionals at price points that ensured original residents could never return, even if they wished to. "It can't be coincidence," Jasmine murmured as she stared at her screen displaying side-by-side images of William Stone at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for Riverview Commons and her grandmother at a community protest the previous month, their paths intersecting a decade before the freezer incident through opposing positions in economic battle with clearly determined victors. Zoe looked up from her poster with curious eyes, asking what coincidence Mommy meant while carefully positioning a photo of herself as infant cradled in Grandma Esther's arms, unknowingly creating perfect symbolic representation of what had been lost beyond mere property, the neighborhood connections and intergenerational support systems that development had scattered like leaves before economic winds. The revelation cast William's generous check in more complicated light. No longer simple gratitude for life-saving action, but potentially weighted with recognition or even guilt. The possibility that his appearance at her door carried significance beyond current circumstances into shared history, neither had acknowledged during their brief interaction. Jasmine continued searching with renewed focus, discovering archived video from community meetings where Esther had spoken with passionate eloquence about neighbors supporting each other through decades of challenges, while developers saw only property values rather than human community, her words carrying particular resonance now as Jasmine navigated her own isolation amid public controversy with few allies remaining. A notification interrupted her research. Breaking news alert announcing William Stone would hold press conference tomorrow morning regarding recent incident involving his son. The timing suspicious given Peterson's escalating smear campaign, yet potentially hopeful if Stone chose to counter false narrative with his considerable influence, creating another complicated intersection between their disparate worlds with unclear motivations driving his continued involvement in situations that wealthy individuals typically manage through intermediaries rather than personal attention. Jasmine closed her laptop with mind racing between past connections and current implications, understanding that coincidence felt inadequate explanation for these intersecting circles, yet uncertain whether the connection represented opportunity or threat. As powerful man whose business decisions had directly impacted her family history, now entered their present circumstance with unknown intentions, their relationship suddenly layered with complexities invisible to outside observers focused only on billionaire gratitude narrative, rather than deeper historical context that potentially informed his unusual personal involvement in situation he could easily have delegated to subordinates. The summons to William Stone's office arrived via discreetly suited messenger-bearing cream-colored envelope with Jasmine Tucker embossed in simple, elegant font. Contents requesting her presence that afternoon with car service arranged for transport. The formality simultaneously intimidating and oddly reassuring amid Peterson's escalating media offensive. Jasmine arranged emergency childcare with reluctant neighbor Mrs. Guzman, who agreed despite growing social discomfort with their association, extracted promises from Zoe to complete homework and avoid online news sites during her absence, then descended to find sleek vehicle waiting as promised, its driver professionally non-committal about his mysterious employer. As they navigated from her neighborhood of dollar stores and check-cashing businesses toward downtown glass towers that housed entities controlling resources greater many nations, security personnel guided her through private entrance avoiding media notice, then upward via executive elevator requiring special access code, reality shifting with each floor as surroundings transitioned from merely expensive to rarefied atmospheric level, where wealth ceased requiring announcement through ornate displays, instead manifesting as perfect minimalism where single perfect orchid held more authentic value than entire rooms of ostentatious furnishings elsewhere. William Stone awaited in office space that redefined Jasmine's conception of power, the room occupying entire top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows framing panoramic city views where clouds drifted past at eye level, creating disorienting sensation of floating above mundane concerns that governed lives below. no desk or traditional office furniture, but simple arrangement of museum-quality seating positioned for conversation rather than hierarchical demarcation. Stone himself stood gazing outward as she entered, his reflection in glass revealing contemplative expression at odds with media portrayal of ruthless business tactician, turning to greet her with directness that bypassed expected pleasantries for immediate substance, characteristic that explained his accelerated rise from coding prodigy to technological visionary whose platforms connected billions while generating wealth that politicians courted and markets monitored. "Thank you for coming despite considerable reasons for distrust," he began, gesturing towards seating arrangement where tea service awaited, the ceramic hand-crafted with subtle beauty, reflecting appreciation for artisanal quality rather than ostentatious display. Continuing without preamble, "I recognized you immediately, though you likely don't remember me. Connection that complicates our current circumstance, beyond simple lifesaver and grateful father narrative dominating media cycles." He paused as she settled cautiously onto chair, worth more than her entire apartment contents, handling delicate teacup with care while processing his unexpected statement, mind racing through possibilities until he provided clarification that shifted her understanding entirely. "I attended several Oak Park community meetings during early Riverpoint development phase," he explained while serving tea with surprisingly unpretentious gesture, standing on periphery, observing while your grandmother, Esther Tucker, spoke with particular moral clarity about community value, transcending property valuation, perspective I failed to fully appreciate at that juncture when quarterly projections and investor expectations dominated my decision frameworks. Jasmine nearly dropped her teacup as past and present collided with disorienting force, memories surfacing of attending those same meetings beside her grandmother, focused primarily on community children she supervised during adult discussions rather than observing specific faces among development representatives. The connection she had suspected from online research now confirmed directly, yet still lacking explanation for his current personal involvement, rather than delegating her situation to public relations department. William set aside his untouched tea, moving toward window where city grid spread below like circuit board he had mastered, while simultaneously manipulating, before turning back with expression suggesting internal debate resolved regarding disclosure level, appearing to choose transparency despite inherent vulnerabilities such choice entailed. "Your grandmother showed extraordinary kindness to my wife before I had money," he admitted with simple dignity that acknowledged debt beyond financial ledgers, revealing core connection that transformed context completely, explaining that Rebecca Stone had suffered devastating miscarriage while visiting maternal cousin in Oak Park neighborhood 15 years earlier, experiencing medical emergency on sidewalk outside community garden where Esther Tucker provided immediate assistance and remarkable compassion despite being complete stranger, sitting with traumatized young woman for hours in hospital waiting room while doctors confirmed nothing could be done to save pregnancy, then ensuring Rebecca had proper support rather than returning alone to empty apartment where William was traveling for early career opportunity, generating contacts that eventually facilitated his technological ascendance. "That kindness came during darkest period of our marriage," William continued with quiet intensity, conveying emotional significance, transcending typical business discourse. "Your grandmother refusing any compensation while telling Rebecca that neighbors support neighbors during difficult times regardless of circumstance. Philosophy, informing community strength, that development ultimately undermined, despite intentions I characterized then as progress rather than disruption. Perspective considerably revised through subsequent decades as wealth accumulated while certain forms of value diminished proportionally. This revelation illuminated his unexpected personal involvement with blinding clarity, explaining recognition glimpsed during apartment visit, and generous check representing not merely payment for current service, but acknowledgement of unrelated debt, never properly addressed, their histories intertwined through connection. neither could have anticipated during freezer incident. Yet now, coloring each interaction with significance invisible to external observers, focused exclusively on billionaire gratitude, narrative, rather than complex human ecosystem, where past actions generated ripples intersecting present circumstances through patterns too intricate for coincidence, yet too organic for orchestration, creating momentary equilibrium between individuals from vastly different positions within societal hierarchy, suddenly connected through shared recognition of value systems operating beyond financial metrics. 3 days after her revelatory meeting with William Stone, Jasmine sat nervously adjusting her only blazer in the busy downtown coffee shop where help wanted sign had promised new beginning. Her application completed and interview scheduled during morning rush when manager could evaluate potential employees under pressure. The coffee shop hummed with energetic efficiency, baristas calling elaborate orders while businesspeople clutched phones and students hunched over laptops. Atmosphere of productivity and normalcy that represented everything Jasmine desperately needed after weeks of tumultuous public attention and private anxiety. Her injured foot had healed enough to support standing shifts required for service work. The uncashed check from William Stone remained hesitation point, despite bills multiplying with mathematical certainty that eventually would force difficult decisions regarding pride versus practicality, but today represented potential solution through honest work rather than charity or controversy. The manager, 30-something woman with practical ponytail and kind eyes named Sophia, had responded encouragingly to Jasmine's experience, discussing potential schedule accommodating school pickups while explaining benefits package, including partial tuition reimbursement that aligned perfectly with long-deferred dreams of nursing program enrollment. Hope flickered dangerously in Jasmine's chest as paperwork progressed smoothly, possibility of stability emerging from chaos through traditional path of diligence and determination, rather than viral spotlight or billionaire intervention, until familiar voice sliced through ambient coffee shop noise with precision of surgeon targeting vital organ, instantly transforming promising moment into nightmare scenario she had feared but not anticipated in this neutral location. Peterson stood beside their table with pristine suit contrasting against casual coffee shop environment, his unexpected presence creating immediate imbalance as he smiled with predatory satisfaction at Jasmine's visible shock, addressing Sophia directly while pretending Jasmine herself were merely furniture rather than person, professional mask firmly in place as he extended business card with practiced smoothness. Robert Peterson, general manager at La Maison Dorée, he introduced himself with emphasis on restaurant name calculated to impress while establishing authority. I noticed my former employee applying here and felt professional obligation to provide context her application likely omits. Sophia accepted card automatically through ingrained politeness despite confusion evident in her expression, while nearby tables quieted as customer conversations paused to observe unfolding drama. Public confrontation, transforming routine interview into performance with unwilling participants and captivated audience. Jasmine found herself frozen between fight and flight responses, confrontation she had studiously avoided through weeks of media attacks, suddenly unavoidable in worst possible context where her economic future hung in balance. Peterson's timing demonstrating strategic brilliance in attacking precisely when recovery seemed possible. I felt responsible to inform potential employers about significant property damage incident resulting in termination. Peterson continued with practiced regret, masking obvious satisfaction, additionally noting tendency toward dramatic exaggeration and disregard for established protocols when personal attention seems attainable. Jasmine found her voice, despite throat constricting with combination of rage and fear, stating firmly that his characterization misrepresented situation where human life had been endangered, but Peterson merely smiled thinly before leaning closer, with voice lowered yet somehow carrying perfectly to surrounding tables. "Nobody crosses me and succeeds in this town," he hissed with first glimpse of authentic emotion breaking through professional veneer, displaying genuine hatred that transcended reasonable response to property damage and suggested deeper issue of challenged authority and public contradiction. Wealthy restaurant patron who had overheard muttering recognition of Peterson from news stories, while Sophia looked increasingly uncomfortable with confrontation disrupting her business. "Let me be absolutely clear," Peterson continued with barely contained malice vibrating beneath polite exterior. "Recommendations follow service industry workers like shadows, particularly when incidents involve guest safety and property damage. My extensive connections ensuring continued consequences for poor judgment, regardless of temporary publicity advantages you might currently enjoy." Other applicants waiting for interviews stared openly while pretending absorption in phones or laptops. Social media potential of confrontation between news cycle characters, guaranteeing documentation despite coffee shops, no photos policy. Jasmine's potential employment opportunity disintegrating with each passing second as Sophia visibly calculated risk versus benefit of associate generating controversy, regardless of circumstance. Peterson straightened his immaculate tie with satisfaction of predator, observing prey weakening, adding unnecessarily loud observation that emotional stability factored significantly in customer service positions, creating multi-layered attack, questioning not only Jasmine's professional history, but mental soundness through carefully worded implications rather than direct accusations, strategy calibrated to maximize damage while minimizing potential legal repercussions. His mission accomplished, Peterson departed with pleasant nod to surrounding tables as though he had performed community service rather than deliberate sabotage, leaving devastation in his wake as Sophia awkwardly suggested they reschedule interview for undefined future date. Transparent delaying tactic, recognizable as permanent rejection without direct statement creating liability. Jasmine gathered her documents with hands trembling from adrenaline and suppressed rage, understanding with crushing clarity that Peterson had demonstrated both reach and ruthlessness, transcending reasonable response, escalating private employment dispute into personal vendetta pursued with resources she could never match. His appearance at precisely timed moment, suggesting surveillance network, tracking her movements and systematically eliminating recovery opportunities, raising stakes beyond reputation or income, into basic question of whether she could rebuild any semblance of normal life, while powerful adversary remained determined to extract punishment disproportionate to perceived offense of challenging his authority through moral action he had characterized as personal attack. Defeat weighed heavy as Jasmine trudged homeward from another failed job interview. Sixth rejection in 9 days, following Peterson's coffee shop ambush, his promise to block her employment opportunities, manifesting with frightening efficiency throughout restaurant industry, where managers suddenly remembered urgent staffing situations resolved moments after recognizing her name or face. Rain fell in dismal sheets, matching her mood as financial reality pressed with increasing urgency. Uncashed check from William Stone representing surrender to circumstances rather than dignified independence. Pride. Luxury rapidly becoming unaffordable, as basic necessities for Zoe required immediate solutions rather than principled stands. Her ancient flip phone vibrated in pocket with unusual persistence, screen displaying unfamiliar number she nearly ignored until maternal responsibility overrode emotional exhaustion, potential childcare emergency always trumping personal feelings as she ducked beneath store awning to answer amid traffic noise and rainfall. Unknown caller identified himself as Thomas, line cook from La Maison Dorée, speaking rapidly with nervous energy, suggesting significant risk, explaining cryptic message about checking online video platform immediately for content, recently uploaded by anonymous account named Kitchen Truth, disconnecting abruptly before Jasmine could question further, as though proximity to information itself might prove dangerous. Curiosity overriding caution, Jasmine navigated cumbersome phone browser towards suggested platform. Connection frustratingly slow as ancient technology struggled with modern website. Minutes crawling by as progress bar advanced with glacial reluctance until finally video materialized on cracked screen with shocking clarity despite technical limitations. Security footage displayed familiar kitchen area from overhead angle Jasmine instantly recognized as camera positioned near dry storage. Timestamp indicating evening. Marcus disappeared, with crystal clear black and white imagery showing Peterson escorting Billionaire heir toward massive freezer, with hand placed collegially on younger man's shoulder in gesture appearing friendly until context revealed darker purpose. Jasmine's breath caught painfully as video continued with damning progression, Peterson pointing toward shelving inside freezer where Marcus dutifully entered while older man checked corridor ensuring no witnesses, before deliberately manipulating external locking mechanism with practiced efficiency suggesting premeditation rather than impulse, handle visibly jamming. As Marcus turned toward exit, only to find himself trapped within sub-zero chamber, with genuine panic registering on his face, while Peterson calmly checked watch and walked away. He tried to hurt him on purpose, Jasmine whispered with horror transcending even her personal conflict with Peterson, understanding, dawning that motivations extended beyond workplace politics into genuinely sinister territory as video continued documenting Billionaire heir increasingly desperate attempts to escape frozen prison while temperature display showed deliberate manipulation toward dangerously low settings incompatible with human survival beyond brief exposure. The footage continued unfolding with timestamp advancing through minutes becoming hours. Marcus visible through frosted door window gradually slowing movements as hypothermia advanced, occasional kitchen staff passing without noticing his diminishing struggles, until Jasmine's own entrance into frame-captured moment of discovery and desperate attempts to alert others before fateful decision to destroy door through physical force, visual evidence vindicating her account with incontrovertible clarity that transformed narrative entirely. Shelter forgotten, Jasmine stood transfixed beneath inadequate awning as rain soaked her shoulders while phones from passing strangers emitted identical audio suggesting simultaneous viewing throughout city. Viral spread occurring with algorithmic efficiency as number freezer truth trended across platforms and notification alerts interrupted conversations citywide. Public opinion transforming with whiplash-inducing velocity from divided speculation toward unified outrage as visual evidence rendered debate obsolete. Her own phone exploded with incoming messages from former co-workers, neighbors, and unknown supporters expressing shock and offering belated solidarity, social vindication arriving simultaneously with profound questions regarding footage, source, and timing. Mysterious appearance, suggesting intentional intervention from individual with access to supposedly missing security recordings and technical ability to distribute anonymously, despite corporate security measures designed to prevent exactly such exposure. Jasmine's mind raced toward obvious suspect, with resources matching required profile, processing implications while video continued circulating with unstoppable momentum across platforms where engagement metrics drove algorithmic promotion, ensuring maximum visibility regardless of corporate damage control attempts, truth escaping institutional containment through digital pathways resistant to traditional suppression methods. News alerts pushed notification that police had arrived at La Maison Dorée, with Peterson seen exiting restaurant accompanied by officers as smartphone cameras documented his expression transforming from confident authority to dawning comprehension that carefully constructed narrative had catastrophically collapsed beneath weight of visual evidence impossible to dismiss as disgruntled employee exaggeration, his face displaying realization that roles had suddenly reversed with accuser becoming accused through mysterious intervention he clearly hadn't anticipated, despite meticulous planning targeting Jasmine while overlooking more powerful, potential adversary with superior resources and motivation. Within hours, video expanded beyond local interest toward national visibility as morning shows booked segments and legal experts discussed potential charges ranging from reckless endangerment through attempted manslaughter. Justice system machinery engaging with surprising efficiency when victim-involved prominent family name and visual evidence provided clarity typically absent from more ambiguous situations, creating sudden reversal where Peterson's extensive connections offered minimal protection against documented actions, challenging explanation beyond malicious intent. Drenched but oblivious to physical discomfort, Jasmine scrolled comment sections with surreal detachment, observing public opinion transform completely as hashtags multiplied across platforms with engagement metrics suggesting record-breaking velocity. Her personal vindication, secondary to profound questions regarding anonymous intervention timing, suggesting orchestrated response precisely when conventional options appeared exhausted. Mysterious benefactor with access and motivation pointing toward William Stone, with implications extending beyond simple gratitude into territory of calculated justice deployment, using methods beyond traditional systems yet producing results conventional channels might never have achieved, given power imbalances evident throughout previous weeks. Morning news broadcasts across every channel featured identical footage of Peterson being escorted from police headquarters following overnight questioning, designer suit replaced by rumpled clothing, and confident smirk, transformed to shell-shocked expression, as reporters shouted questions about potential charges, including reckless endangerment, false imprisonment, and attempted involuntary manslaughter, terms carrying weight of years rather than months, should prosecution proceed with full-force evidence suggested. Preliminary hearings scheduled with unprecedented speed, given victims' family connections, while restaurant ownership issued carefully crafted statement, distancing themselves from former manager now characterized as rogue employee acting, without corporate knowledge. Predictable damage control that nonetheless ensured Peterson stood alone without institutional support during legal proceedings where power dynamics had shifted decisively away from position that previously allowed consequence-free intimidation. Text message from unknown number appeared on Jasmine's phone requesting meeting at Stone Enterprises headquarters that afternoon regarding opportunity, requiring immediate discussion. Transportation arrangements identical to previous summons, suggesting William Stone himself rather than intermediary. Timing indicating planned discussion rather than reactive response to rapidly evolving situation that had transformed public narrative with algorithmic efficiency. Social media companies privately studied for future case analysis. Jasmine found herself once again ascending private elevator toward rarefied atmosphere, where decision-makers observed rather than experienced consequences of systems they controlled, though perspective altered through revelations regarding intertwined histories, creating context beyond simplistic wealth versus poverty dichotomy. Media coverage preferred for narrative simplicity. William awaited in different space than previous meeting. Conference room flooded with natural light from walls consisting entirely of glass overlooking city, where Peterson had once reigned within limited fiefdom, now revealed as insignificant compared to true power wielded by individuals capable of releasing security footage through channels resistant to corporate suppression techniques. Conference table displayed architectural renderings and business plans in physical and digital formats, suggesting prepared presentation rather than impromptu discussion. William standing beside local neighborhood maps with expressions suggesting personal investment beyond typical business considerations, greeting Jasmine with simple directness that bypassed pleasantries for immediate substance. Justice system will address Peterson through appropriate channels. He began without preamble, though certain evidence sources may remain confidential throughout proceedings given technical complexities involved in digital transmission pathways. Acknowledgement, without confession regarding mysterious footage appearance that transformed public narrative with precision timing, suggesting orchestrated intervention rather than coincidental discovery. Moving directly to apparent meeting purpose. William activated wall screen displaying sophisticated business presentation, labeled Stone Community Ventures with subtitle Neighborhood-Focused Culinary Initiative, explaining vision for restaurant chain, emphasizing locally sourced ingredients, workforce development, and profit-sharing models while gesturing toward architectural renderings, showing food service operations, occupying ground floors of buildings with affordable housing units filling floors above. Each location anchors rather than displaces existing neighborhood character, William explained, while digital presentation advanced through financial projections indicating sustainable business model balancing profitability with community benefit, employment opportunities prioritizing local residents through training programs, developing transferable skills beyond traditional service industry limitations, underlying philosophy, representing significant departure from typical development approaches, maximizing extraction while minimizing reinvestment. Jasmine listened with cautious optimism, tinged with confusion regarding her role within ambitious project, clearly representing years of planning rather than recent inspiration. Connection becoming clear only when William advanced presentation toward management structure slide, indicating her name as regional director, overseeing 5 initial locations, including site-occupying block where grandmother Esther had once tended community garden before displacement through earlier development phase, position carrying salary triple her previous earnings plus benefits package, including educational allowances, matching nursing program requirements long abandoned as financially unattainable. People who understand the value of others should be in charge, William stated with simple conviction, transcending typical corporate rhetoric through personal connection to principle, clearly informed by retrospective assessment of previous approaches. Explaining project represented evolution in thinking regarding community development, beyond profit extraction towards sustainable model, recognizing social fabric as valuable infrastructure rather than irrelevant externality. Transformation suggesting lessons absorbed through decades, separating young entrepreneur from mature business leader, reassessing impact metrics beyond quarterly returns. Tears filled Jasmine's eyes with complex emotion beyond simple gratitude or vindication. Understanding opportunity represented both personal advancement and philosophical alignment, allowing professional growth without compromising values. Grandmother Esther had instilled through example rather than instruction, unexpected path toward meaningful work rather than mere employment appearing precisely when conventional options seemed exhausted through circumstances beyond her control, yet somehow connecting back to consistent character demonstrated through critical decisions prioritizing human welfare above institutional demands. Questions regarding qualification for position with responsibilities exceeding previous experience must have shown on her expression, prompting William to explain how security footage revealed not merely Peterson's actions but her own decision-making under extreme pressure, demonstrating leadership qualities including moral clarity, decisive action when seconds mattered, and willingness to accept personal consequences for principled stands, characteristics more valuable than traditional management credentials. According to assessment metrics, he personally evaluated when selecting executives capable of implementing vision rather than merely executing established protocols. The position offers legitimate opportunity requiring genuine skill rather than charitable sinecure. William clarified with respect, indicating authentic valuation rather than pity, explaining community-centered business model, required leadership understanding service industry realities from ground-level perspective, while maintaining commitment to values traditional profit maximization, often sacrificed through gradual compromises justified through market demands, her experience providing insights unavailable to typical management candidates regardless of prestigious credentials or theoretical knowledge, divorced from practical application under genuine pressure, where character revealed itself through consequential decisions. Golden afternoon sunlight bathed the newly constructed building, standing proudly on the corner where Grandma Esther's community garden once flourished. Modern architecture, thoughtfully incorporating elements, honoring neighborhood history through brick patterns, matching original structures, and mural depicting community elders, including Esther's image tending vegetables alongside children, playing visual celebration of connection rather than erasure of past through development. The Riverpoint Community Kitchen gleamed with fresh paint and tasteful signage featuring vegetable motifs and welcoming font. Ground floor restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing bustling food preparation and communal tables designed for conversation rather than transaction, while upper stories contain 24 affordable housing units prioritized for service industry workers with rental rates indexed to income rather than market speculation. Revolutionary model challenging fundamental assumptions regarding workforce housing in rapidly gentrifying urban environments. Jasmine stood before gathered crowd wearing professional attire that maintained individual style rather than corporate uniformity, confidence radiating through posture, transformed through 12 months of intensive management training and practical experience, implementing vision requiring both business acumen and human understanding. Her journey from server to regional director, marking personal transformation matching physical changes surrounding her. Beside her stood 10-year-old Zoe, proudly wearing junior chef apron embroidered with restaurant logo. Weekend cooking classes, having nurtured budding culinary interest while stable schedule allowed Jasmine to attend school performances and parent conferences without sacrificing economic security. Childhood now protected from adult anxieties that had previously seeped through, despite her best efforts at maintaining normalcy. Amid struggle, William Stone and his wife Rebecca flanked Jasmine's other side with genuine smiles rather than ceremonial appearances, their involvement transcending typical wealthy donor relationship through regular menu tastings and authentic conversations with staff regarding implementation challenges. Commitment demonstrated through consistent presence rather than mere financial contribution, then delegation to subordinates handling less glamorous operational details. Local news cameras documented ribbon-cutting ceremony alongside social media influencers, drawn by innovative business model generating engagement metrics attractive to platforms prioritizing socially conscious content. Attendance exceeding expectations as community members filled sidewalks and spilled into street temporarily closed for celebration. Curiosity about high-profile owner complemented by genuine support for neighborhood-centered development approach, challenging traditional gentrification patterns through intentional inclusion. Former co-workers from La Maison Dorée stood among staff wearing new uniforms designed for comfort rather than status signaling. Kitchen hierarchy flattened through profit-sharing model and educational pathways, allowing advancement based on demonstrated skill rather than credentials requiring financial privilege to obtain. Head chef position filled by Thomas, whose anonymous security footage release remained officially unconfirmed but tacitly acknowledged through meaningful glances during private moments. Jasmine approached ribbon stretched across entrance with ceremonial scissors sized for visibility rather than practicality, pausing before cutting to address gathered crowd, with voice carrying confidence developed through management training including public speaking modules, once intimidating but now comfortable through regular practice. 1 year ago today, I kicked down a freezer door because someone needed help. She began with characteristic directness that had become leadership trademark, continuing with acknowledgement that individual action, while necessary, proved insufficient without systemic change, addressing underlying conditions creating false choices between livelihood and human dignity. This building represents different approach to business where profit enables rather than extracts, where workers receive living wages plus benefits including health insurance, educational support, and affordable housing developed specifically for those preparing our food and serving our community, she explained while gesturing toward upper floors, where several residents waved from balconies, featuring container gardens supplying fresh herbs to restaurant kitchen. The crowd erupted in applause as Jasmine continued outlining business model, challenging fundamental assumptions about service industry employment, explaining how stable scheduling accommodated family responsibilities while eliminating precarity, causing perpetual anxiety, undermining well-being regardless of wage level, technical innovations reducing administrative overhead rather than replacing human interaction valued explicitly within service model, emphasizing connection beyond transaction. When we value people over profit, everyone thrives, she concluded with simple conviction earned through lived experience rather than theoretical understanding, words carrying weight precisely because speaker had personally experienced consequences of opposing philosophy, placing quarterly returns above human considerations. Transformation from individual moral stand to systemic implementation, representing true victory beyond personal vindication. Through Peterson's legal consequences, including community service and industry blacklisting following plea agreement, scissors sliced through ribbon with satisfying finality as afternoon light caught symbolic moment marking. Completion of journey begun through individual moral courage, expanded through unexpected alliance, bridging worlds separated by economic circumstance yet connected through shared recognition that genuine value transcended financial metrics, restaurant immediately filling with community members experiencing environment designed for gathering rather than mere consumption. Jasmine moved through space, greeting guests alongside daughter, proudly explaining menu items, featuring recipes contributed by neighborhood elders, including several from Grandma Esther's, handwritten cards preserved through decades, traditional dishes elevated through professional presentation while maintaining authentic connections to cultural heritage, embodying philosophy that progress honored rather than erased foundations upon which it built. The restaurant hummed with conversation and laughter as golden hour light streamed through windows designed to maximize natural illumination. Staff, moving with purpose, unmarked by frantic anxiety. Characterizing typical food service operations, prioritizing efficiency above humanity. Visible pride in workspace reflecting fundamental dignity through employment. Prioritizing well-being alongside productivity rather than extracting one at expense of other. William observed operations from corner table with expressions suggesting genuine satisfaction transcending typical investor metrics. Wife Rebecca engaged in animated conversation with senior community members whose gardens once occupied space transformed through development prioritizing continuity rather than disruption. Circle somehow completing itself through model, recognizing interdependence rather than independence as true foundation for sustainable prosperity, encompassing measures beyond financial statements to include community vitality evidenced through intergenerational connections flourishing within thoughtfully designed environment.